Horror movies are all about pushing boundaries, taking audiences and ratings boards to the very limit of what they can stomach. Some films have been so hardcore that entire countries have taken steps to ban them from their theaters, in some cases, making screening or possessing them a criminal act. Sometimes you can see the rationale behind a movie being banned, but not always. For one reason or another, these horror films were all battlegrounds for censorship, deemed too disturbing for viewers, but they still managed to find their audiences anyway. A Serbian Film. A Serbian Film has a reputation as one of the most extreme horror movies ever made, and it's a reputation that's well earned. Centering on an adult film actor who's been hired to participate in an increasingly sadistic production, the story is meant to be a metaphor for life in Serbia, conveying how the country screws its people over from birth. The metaphor gets very literal, being represented on screen by torture, murder, necrophilia, and other even worse things. With that kind of taboo content, it's far from surprising that a large number of countries wanted nothing to do with the movie. At one point or another, a Serbian film was banned in Germany, Norway, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Spain, and Singapore, and the countries that eventually allowed the movie required significant edits. The movie is so extreme that it's almost gotten people thrown in real-life prison. Following a Serbian film's ban in Spain, the director of a film festival faced criminal charges for daring to show the movie anyway, a move which drew condemnation from the film's director. Despite how violent the film is, it uses its extreme violence to make a point, and of course no children were actually harmed during the making of it. A Serbian film may be one of the most boundary-pushing movies ever made, but it's still just a movie, and as a horror movie, it's pretty genuinely effective. Saw 6 and Saw 3D. The Saw series of horror movies was sadistic from the start, but weirdly, it wasn't until the 6th entry that any country made moves to ban them. For some reason, Saw 6 was initially banned from Thailand and Spain, with Spanish regulators giving the film a rating usually reserved for pornography. It's an odd move considering the 6th movie doesn't do anything the previous 5 didn't already get away with. The follow-up picture, alternatively called Saw 3D, Saw 7, or Saw: The Final Chapter, was also banned from public exhibition in Germany for its violence. But what makes that movie more violent than the installments that preceded it is a mystery. The 7th Saw movie was kind of a cornball gimmicky sequel, lousy enough to put the franchise into hibernation for years. Hostel and Hostel Part 2. Lots of European commentators had an issue with the first Hostel for making the continent seem like a lethal tourist trap, but it was only in Ukraine that the movie pushed enough buttons to get itself banned. Both Hostel and its sequel were outlawed in the country for excessive cruelty, as well as for portraying the neighborhood as a place where tourists get tortured for money. Despite the ban, the movie is still legally available for private viewing, just don't let them catch you screening it in the front yard. Beyond Ukraine, the uncut version of Hostel Part 2 is banned in Germany and New Zealand, and the film was only released in Malaysia and Singapore after undergoing cuts to its more extreme scenes. Some politicians in the UK have also argued that the film should be illegal, a crusade made extra absurd by the fact that at least one politician who spoke out against the movie eventually admitted that he'd never even watched it. It's a fact that speaks to how arbitrary these censorship measures often are. One viewer's trash is another audience's trashy good time. Possession. Possession is one of the best and most bonkers horror movies ever made, but that doesn't mean everyone was comfortable with its content when it was released in 1981. Following a limited theatrical run in the UK, Possession was labeled as a distasteful video nasty and effectively banned for a decade, not getting released on home video in uncut form until 1999. The movie also had a difficult time getting an uncut release in the United States. While it was never formally banned, the original US release was heavily edited, resulting in a number of different versions being circulated with dramatic variations. One version notoriously cut out an astonishing 40 minutes, rearranging scenes and adding optical effects that turned an already challenging movie into something all but impossible to understand. It wasn't until 2000 that the original version became widely available in the US, which is shocking considering the movie's relatively tame nature. While its plot may feel like a fever dream, it's no more violent or graphic than other horror movies of the era. It's just a lot weirder. Land of the Dead. Banning a movie instantly makes it more notorious. Most authorities tend to do it only in extreme circumstances, with movies so extreme that they'd test the mettle of even the most jaded viewer. So it's odd that a relatively tame studio effort like George Romero's Land of the Dead ended up being banned in the Ukraine, especially when more typically restrictive places like the UK classified the movie as being suitable for teenagers. The movie's ban in Ukraine comes down to unique context. Specifically, it was banned for its portrayal of cannibalism, not because its scenes of humans getting devoured were especially gory, but rather due to concerns that such content would evoke memories of the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions when it was inflicted on the nation by Joseph Stalin's government between 1932 and 33. The reason behind the ban raises more questions than it answers. Land of the Dead was released in 2005, some 72 years after the events of the genocide, and doesn't have anything to do with famine or Soviet history. You can almost see the rationale, but is a zombie movie that takes place in post-apocalyptic Pennsylvania really going to be the thing that opens those old wounds? It's one of George Romero's worst movies, sure, but it's not that bad. Grotesque. 2009's Grotesque is a 73-minute exploitation horror movie from Japan that focuses chiefly on the kidnapping and sadistic murder of a young couple. That's it, nothing else happens. Grotesque is the dictionary definition of torture porn. The UK's Film Classification Board refused to put any stamp of approval on the film, stating that the movie actually posed a risk to society. Running down the movie's main offenses, the censor cited acts of amputation, eye gouging, castration, and evisceration resulting in a gory and violent death. In other words, a typical horror movie fan's definition of a fun Friday night. The lack of a traditional narrative only bolstered the board's decision to reject the movie, with their assessment being that the film could not be cut to satisfy their standards when its very concept was so objectionable. Grotesque's home country had no such concerns, although the British ban did spark a debate over the artistic merits of the splatter film. The controversy brought a wave of new publicity to the movie, suggesting once again that there's nothing so valuable for a movie's long-term reputation as the allure it gains from being banned. Father's Day. Described as pure grindhouse madness, Father's Day is a Canadian horror comedy about a man getting revenge on the killer who molested and murdered his father. The outlandish concept is clearly tongue-in-cheek in execution, not that that mattered to the Australian government. Although Father's Day was allowed to screen in Sydney for its 2012 theatrical premiere, classification was refused for its home video release, resulting in an effective ban on the movie in the country, with future screenings of it at film festivals being cancelled. With the film banned from a video release, a distributor for Father's Day took Australian censors to task for taking the movie's content out of context. After much back and forth in the press, the movie was eventually released in 2013, leaving a censored version that toned down the gore. Slender Man. Sony Pictures' Slender Man is the first studio movie to be inspired by the online horror phenomenon, telling the story of a group of teenage girls who seek out the mysterious monster. At least, that was the plan. Prior to its release, Slender Man sparked controversy due to its relationship to a real-life attempted murder that took place near Waukesha, Wisconsin in 2014, when two middle school students violently attacked their friend in an effort to appease the fictional creature. In a lead-up to the movie's theatrical rollout, the father of one of the attackers condemned the movie, accusing its producers of capitalizing on a tragedy, saying, "In my opinion, it's extremely distasteful. All we're doing is extending the pain all three of these families have gone through." Reportedly, the negative buzz spooked Sony into dramatically chopping down the movie, removing much of the film's violence as well as plot arcs and entire characters. But for some exhibitors, that self-censorship wasn't enough, with theaters near the site of the attack refusing to screen the movie at all. The result of all the drama was an incoherent mess of a movie that got little in the way of a marketing push, getting poorly received by just about everyone. The most puzzling thing is that anyone could have seen the controversy coming from a mile away, which makes one wonder why producers even tried to make the movie in the first place. The Bunny Game. An independent 76-minute movie produced for $13,000, The Bunny Game easily ran afoul of British censors upon its release in 2010. Short, slight, and brutal, the movie centers on the kidnapping and torture of a prostitute hitchhiker by a sadistic truck driver. Nothing more, nothing less. The BBFC refused classification for the movie on the basis of its graphic depictions of sexual abuse, calling the movie unacceptable to the public. The board's decision didn't come down to any one objectionable scene, but rather the movie's very concept. According to a statement made by the board, the principal focus of the work is the unremitting sexual and physical abuse of a helpless woman, as well as the sadistic and sexual pleasure the man derives from this. In short, there may be no version of the Bunny Game that British censors would find acceptable. On principle alone, that's a pretty big bummer for British fans of the horror genre. The Human Centipede 2 full sequence. Despite its notoriously disgusting concept, the first Human Centipede movie has a fairly traditional feel to it. Its central idea of kidnapped people being stitched together end to end is body horror more nauseating in concept than in execution, with the movie itself being fairly restrained when it comes to graphic detail. That restraint went out the window for the movie's sequel, which went to extreme lengths to shock and horrify, getting itself banned from several nations upon its release. Stark and confrontational, the Human Centipede 2 full sequence hit the throttle on its use of sadistic, nihilistic violence. While the first film's villain was a demented surgeon who at least sort of knew what he was doing, the second movie's villain is just demented, creating his centipede with brute force and barbed wire. The film is so bleak and brutal that the British Board of Film Classification outright refused to give it a rating, saying no amount of cuts would make the movie acceptable enough to be exhibited or sold. The movie was eventually approved for release in the United Kingdom, but only after having 2.5 minutes of footage cut out. Australia required 30 seconds worth of edits, while New Zealand never let the movie screen at all. If you missed out on the sequel, you didn't miss much, but it's still so much better than the third movie in the series, which censors around the world didn't even bother with. That one's not terribly offensive, it's more just terrible.